Today, I'm going to be breaking down how I professionally color grade my videos from a log profile to a final grade. So getting a good grade all starts in camera on your shoot day. If you're new to filmmaking, there's a few things you're going to want to learn. The first one being white balance. White balance means the Kelvin of the light that you're in, or how warm or cool the environment you're in is. If you're indoors shooting with controlled lighting, typically somewhere on the back of the light will say or display what Kelvin that light is set to. If you're just in a bedroom using light bulbs, those will also typically say somewhere on the bulb or on the bulb's package what Kelvin that bulb is. Now, if you're outside and it's daylight, you can typically safely set your camera between 55 and 6500 Kelvin. Normally, I'm just running mine at 5500 Kelvin if it's daylight. If it's cloudy or a different daylight, like shade or anything like that, those will all have its own Kelvin that you can look up. Another thing you're gonna wanna set before you start shooting is a log profile in your camera. Basically, this gives you a flat profile image that will give you more flexibility when you're in your grading process. Now, if you're using a mirrorless camera, you can Google that model of camera or YouTube it on how to set your camera into a log profile. Now that you've put your camera into the correct white balance and put your camera into a log profile, you're going to want to bring up a wave or histogram scope. This will show your camera's exposure so that when you're setting the settings to the environment that you're in, you're not overexposing or underexposing your image. This will give you an even exposure so that when you go to grade it, you have the maximum dynamic range as well as flexibility on what you can do with that image. So now that we've shot our images in the correct settings and exposure, we're gonna bring it into our software. All right, so in the top right corner here, you can see all of the effects that I've laid onto this clip to get to my final grade. So we have color wheels, curves, hue/saturation, a couple custom LUTs, another color wheels, a Rec 709 conversion LUT, and a dehancer effect. Technically, the dehancer effect should probably be before our conversion LUT, but this is just the stack that I chose for this particular grade. So if we go through and deselect all of these effects, we can start to see what the original image looked like. So I've split the footage in half here so you can see what the final grade looked like compared to the log footage side by side. You can tell we have a lot more contrast, the colors pop a lot more, and overall it just looks a lot better. So every single time I color grade, I drag all of my effects onto the clip first, just because I know pretty much every time I use the same stack of effects and I just use them differently each time. Before I start grading anything, I'll use a conversion LUT and I'll have that selected so I can preview what it will look like converted as I add these effects on. One of the most important things is that the conversion LUT is at the very bottom of your stack so that that effect is applied last. This is a mistake I made early on my color grading journey, and it makes a huge difference. You wouldn't think that just having your effects in a different order would make a difference because they're all the same effects applied the same way, but having them in a different order will change your look overall completely. So conversion LUT at the top, very first effect applied, compared to the order that I had it with the conversion LUT being the second last one, and boom, way different. So now that I've deselected all of the clips other than the conversion LUT so I can preview what it looks like converted as I'm doing the effects, I'm gonna go to the first color wheels and I'm going to go to my color and effects tab so I can preview my scopes in the top left corner here. Basically what I've done is I've turned up the highlights, increasing the exposure on the highlights. I've decreased the exposure in the shadows to give the image a bit more contrast. The next effect that I always apply is my color curves. Now, typically I'm doing this very fine S curve. So you can see in the highlights, it's turned up a little bit. So again, I'm turning up the exposure a little bit in our highlights You can see this in our Luma scope here on the top left. If I crank up the highlight wheel, you'll see the scopes going up, and you'll see on the preview that my image is clearly very overexposed. So typically what I'm going for is these highlights being as close to 100 as possible, and my shadows being as close to 0 as possible without the image being too crushed. So somewhere around here is where I would set it. Again, with the color curves, you can see the same thing. If I turn up the highlights too much, the image gets crushed and it's overexposed. So pretty much every time I'm doing some sort of variation of an S curve with my Luma color curve. Now, typically after this, I'll put a hue/saturation curves on. Here you can see I've turned up the blue and the red/pink saturation up. That is because of the socks and the pink shirt. I also knew going into this I wanted like a dark semi-cool look, so that's another reason why I turned up the blue curve there. After we do our initial exposure adjustment, that's where we get into a stylized LUT. So a stylized LUT will give you a preset to a certain color that you might want in your video. Here I've used a Kodak styled LUT. I have this one at 97%, so I have it fairly high. Often I will use closer to 50% of the stylized LUT and then do more coloring with my later on color wheels. But here I've used 97% on the opacity of this effect. So you can see as I'm dragging this down, it applies the effect a little less. So I'll bring it back to 97.89 there. Next, I've added another styled LUT. So this one adds a bit more of a cool effect, bit more blue in the shadows there. And overall, I really wanted this image to be really dark and cool. So that's why I decided to add another stylized LUT. After that, I go into my color wheels. So this is the same as our exposure wheels, except for we're using the other side of this wheel to add a bit more color in certain aspects of the image. So here I've slightly increased the saturation in the highlights and turned this wheel to the orange so that we have a bit more of an orange hue in our highlights. And coming over to our shadows, I've slightly increased the saturation there and brought it to more of a blue hue to further put that image into that cool blue look that I was going for. Now, overall, this is a great image already, but this client, I'm really going for that trendy gym look that you see all over Instagram right now, and I really wanted to add a little bit of bloom to the highlights. So I have this effect here called Dehancer Pro. You can get this software for, or this effect rather, for any editing software you might have. It's a really nice tool. You can do film emulation with it. That's typically what it's used for. However, here I've just used the bloom effect, which you can see applied here at 55%. This just gives that kind of soft glow to the highlights that I really like. So that's what I used here, was just the bloom effect. So yeah, that's how I color grade my videos. By no means am I a professional colorist. I'm definitely still learning. If a professional colorist saw this, he probably would point out a lot of things that I did wrong. But overall, I think this image looks really good. It pops really well on social media, and I hope that somewhere along this video, you were able to grab some piece of knowledge from this. If you're interested in seeing more tutorial videos like this, let me know. Comment down below what you want to see next, and I'll do my best to do it.